The Wizard of Quantum by Johann Ortel. Chapter 4, Ghost from the Past. The doorbell chimed, echoing through the house as the front door creaked open. A much older Massimo Silva, now in his 60s, hurried in from the cold, quickly shutting the door in the face of the crisp breeze. "Oh, thank goodness, that must be him now," Susan exclaimed in relief. His once dark hair and beard had turned a distinguished gray, and he moved with the wariness of a man who had been carrying a burden for far too long. He shrugged off his coat and tossed it onto the rack without a second thought. In the background, Markus's laughter rang out, filling the house. "Saved by the bell," he joked, his voice rich with amusement. Massimo froze at the sound. That voice, he knew it too well. It was as if the room grew colder with every passing second, the laughter slowing, deepening, echoing in his mind. Instinctively, he turned his head toward the voice, his heart pounding. Through the narrow slits in the foyer wall, Massimo caught a glimpse of Susan rising from her chair. As she moved out of sight, the world seemed to slow around him as Markus came into view, sitting casually at the dinner table with the rest of the Silva family. The sight of him there, so comfortable, so present, made Massimo's blood run cold. He quickly ducked out of sight, pressing his back against the foyer wall, trying to steady his breathing. His heart raced, and his skin felt icy, the shock rooting him to the spot. "Papa?" Susan's voice called out, laced with concern. She found him there, behind the foyer wall, looking more fragile than she had ever seen him. "Papa, I've been trying to reach you all day. I've been worried sick," she scolded gently, pressing a kiss to his cold cheek. Massimo forced a weak smile, still shivering. "Sorry, my belle, my phone died, and the roads are terrible." Susan's expression softened. "I'm just glad you're safe." She took his hands in hers, feeling how cold they were. "You're freezing. Let's get you warmed up." "Yes, just let me get to the fireplace for a minute," Massimo said, his voice trembling as much from the cold as from something deeper, more unsettling. Susan walked with him to the lounge, where a warm fire crackled in the hearth. Massimo extended his hands toward the flames, letting the heat thaw his frozen skin. The light from the fire danced in his tired eyes, pulling him back to memories he wished he could forget. "We have a guest for dinner," Susan said softly, her excitement laced with a touch of nervousness. Massimo nodded absently, his gaze still fixed on the flames. "You go ahead, I'll be in just now." Susan gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before returning to the dining room to tend to their guest. Massimo remained by the fire, his eyes locked on the burning logs as they crackled and popped. The warmth seeped into his bones, but it couldn't chase away the cold fear that had settled in his heart. The firelight flickered, and in its glow, Massimo was transported back to that fateful day, the day that had changed everything. A car had hurtled off a cliff, engulfed in flames. It exploded on impact as it crashed into the rocks below, sending a fiery plume into the night sky. Markus and Massimo stood at the cliff's edge, staring silently at the burning wreckage below. Susan peeked around the corner of the living room, catching sight of her father still standing by the fireplace. "Papa, our guest," she began, her voice tentative. Markus stepped into view, standing beside Susan. "Please meet your old friend Markus's son, Markus Jr., Susan introduced. Markus extended his hand toward the older man. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Silva," he said warmly. Massimo reached out, and their hands met in a firm handshake. No blue spark, just a tense grip. Massimo nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Markus Jr., is it?" he asked, releasing the handshake. Markus nodded in response. Massimo studied him for a moment, then remarked, "Your resemblance to your father is incredible." There was an uncomfortable pause before Massimo turned to Susan. "So how did the two of you meet?" Susan hesitated, sensing the tension. "Funny thing, I literally bumped into him at the supermarket this afternoon," she explained, forcing a smile. Massimo's tone was tinged with sarcasm. "You bumped into him? What are the chances of that?" He chuckled lightly, a hint of amusement glinting in his eyes. Susan sensed the unease between the two men and quickly tried to lighten the mood. "Let's not let the food get cold," she suggested, motioning toward the dining room. After dinner, Markus and Massimo found themselves on the white front porch, the night air crisp and quiet. "Just like old times, right? Putting on a Silva show," Markus whispered, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Markus, why are you here? Massimo demanded. His tone was far from warm, his agitation barely concealed. Inside the house, Susan and Graham were busy cleaning up the kitchen. Through the window, Susan watched her father and Markus on the front porch. There's something weird going on between those two, she muttered, concern etched on her face. There seems to be some tension. Graham nodded. Yeah, I noticed it too, he agreed, drying a dish. Anyway, I'm going to start packing. We're booked on the 5:30 flight. Susan continued, her thoughts lingering on Markus. You know, in my hurry at the shop today, I never gave Markus our home address. Graham shrugged, offering a possible explanation. Google? Susan frowned. I guess so. On the front porch of the Silva house, the tension escalated as Marcus's cheerful demeanor turned more sinister. Is this the way you treat an old friend, after everything I have done for the Silva family?